As an Assembly member, Weber has translated her commitment to education into her ambitious legislative agenda. During her freshman year in the California State Legislature, 5 of 7 of her successful bills were related to education, including ACR 45, urging lawmakers and the governor to restore funding to early childhood education. AB 56, requiring standards for installing carbon monoxide devices in schools. And AB 899, linking English language bills signed in 2014 include legislation addressing civil rights, education, protection for persons with disabilities, and voting rights. Her Select Committee on Campus Climate has been exploring some of the racial incidents on state university campuses, the responses from university officials, and possible policy changes to make the campuses safer and more welcoming for all students. She is also outspoken on the importance of investing in early childhood education as a means of preventing dropout rates, dependence on social services, incarceration, and unemployment. Assemblymember Weber is the mother of a daughter and son, has 2 grandchildren. She is the widow of the late Honorable Daniel Weber, a California state judge. Welcome, Dr. Weber.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I want to get right into this. In a few minutes, we're going to take a break. But before we do that, I want to get into 1 or 2 questions that we have time for. And my first question is, what do you feel were your most successful efforts in the legislature this year?
Well, clearly AB 953 is probably the most significant piece of legislation that we passed this year. And mainly because it required the greatest amount of effort on our part. It was basically, we were attacked by all law enforcement concerning this bill on racial profiling. And it had statewide implication and a statewide mandate to accomplish the goal in terms of beginning the process of ending racial profiling. It became the bill, really, of the Capitol in terms of the publicity, the interest, those that were engaged in the battle. It was quite a battle because not only were we dealing with law enforcement and their resistance to it, but we also were dealing with the governor and his resistance to it. And even the Attorney General, Kamala Harris, did not come out in support of the bill. And so we were really battling the big boys, in other words. And it was almost like a Samson, David and Goliath story. But the community was strong. Had great support from PICO and SDOP and the folks that are here and a number of other alliances up and down the state. And they were determined to pass this bill. There were about 20 some odd bills dealing with the issue of police violence against our community. And almost all of those bills failed. I think 2 or 3 of them finally made it to the governor's desk. There was tremendous lobbying against all the body camera bills, all the issues of accountability, those kinds of things. And so this became one of the strongest bills that they probably ignored, the police department, until the very end, because they assumed it would have been killed in appropriations or someplace because, according to them, it has a heavy price tag on it because it is a state mandate. It's not a suggestion. And so this bill made it all the way through. And I really have to thank the community because it truly was a David and Goliath story because we were fighting those who had all the power in their hands to reject the bill. We finally got it out of all the houses and got it to the governor's desk. And I was told that by those on the other, some of our supporters, that when they met with the governor's staff, they basically said they would take an act of God for the governor to sign this bill, I was told. And I told somebody, but they didn't know Jesus was coming, that his army was on its way. Intervention was there because the community showed up when it was being heard on the floor. At the very last part of the Senate, they had a huge rally of over 1,000 people at the Capitol. They then blocked the governor's doors, all the ministers in prayer, and blocked the governor's office for over 2 hours, shut down the hallway. And so that began the process. And I really thank them because that was a bill that will change how business is done in California.
Thank you. And we're going to take a break real quick. And when we come back, we're going to continue our interview with Assembly Member Shirley Weber. So stay tuned. We'll be right back in a couple of minutes. So my next question to you is, how will the racial profiling bill, AB 953, impact local government?
Well, as I pointed out, it is a mandate, which when there's a state mandate means you don't have the option of doing it or not doing it. You must do it. And so every police department in the state has to collect data now on racial profiling, because in the past they've said we don't know how big the problem is. We don't even know if we have a problem because we don't collect data. And in San Diego, we've asked for data over and over, and we'd start the process and maybe we'd get it for a year. Then because there was no real mandate, it just fall off the chart and go somewhere else and what have you. Well, this will require every police department to basically collect data, to basically identify who they stopped, unless it's a traffic stop or something clearly on that level, but just as you're stopping people, who did you stop? Why did you stop them? What was the outcome? Who were they? Were they black, brown, member of a particular religious group? What can you identify physically? Because that's what profiling is about. It's not what they really are, but who you think they are.
Right.
And so they will have to collect that data, every police officer. That data then will be compiled by their station and will be sent to the Attorney General. And every year she will compile a report on the status of racial profiling in the state. We then have a committee that will be formed statewide that has members of the police department, members in terms of law enforcement will be a part of it. They can identify their people. There will be folks from civil rights organizations. There'll be community individuals. There'll be a broad range of individuals who serve on a statewide committee. And that committee then will take the data and information and the report from the Attorney General, will then analyze it, and we'll also have some scholars on there whose area is criminal justice. And then they'll have some statewide hearings about what they found out to be true and recommendations. These recommendations obviously will be taken by POST, which is the police officers training group, and basically beginning to look at how do we change what we're doing and how do we basically change our training of police officers and begin to monitor it. It'll be important because this data will show when it's happening, why it's happening, and what the outcome is. And that's important because we know oftentimes when we look at television and we see these things that have happened and people have taped them, oftentimes those things begin with an unnecessary stop.
Right.
An unnecessary stop. A woman's light is cracked or this or that. And it escalates to another whole level. And there really would have been no arrest, nothing that would have happened to that person, but it's an unnecessary stop.
Right.
So that if we can eliminate the unnecessary stops, we'll probably decrease the kind of violence against our community.
Okay. Now, on October the 4th of 2015, an article in the Los Angeles Times reported, and I quote, California is about to tackle head-on the change issue of racial bias in law enforcement. Governor Jerry Brown this weekend signed legislation mandating that California law enforcement agencies collect and make public data on the racial makeup of all those encountered by police. For civil rights activists, Brown's action was a big step toward protecting minorities from racial profiling. For many in law enforcement, the measure creates a massive new bureaucracy, a bureaucratic headache that will do little to illuminate the question of whether police threat minority groups fairly. This is a quote here. It's a terrible piece of legislation, said Lieutenant Steve James, president of the Long Beach Police Officers Association and the national trustee of the California Fraternal Order of Police, end the quote. My question is, what do you say to law enforcement officers like Lieutenant Steve James?
Well, I don't get excited over that stuff because I assume that the role of the police officers and the role of many of their organizations is really to protect their members. Mm-hmm. And in their minds, the best way to protect their members is the lack of information. Mm-hmm. In my mind, the best way to protect their members is to have information, right, because that information will improve their relationships with their communities. If there are myths about what's going on, those myths will be dispelled. If there are problems, we can solve the problem. So putting your head in the sand doesn't mean that you're not exposing another part of your body that has a problem. And so people like that, I expect those kind of comments. We got those comments all the time. It was reassuring to me, however, that I did receive comments from people like Police the Lansdowne, former police chief, who was very much in favor of 953. And when everybody talked about how difficult it was to collect data, he talked to me and said, listen, there's one thing the police department knows how to do better than anything in the world. He said, is collect data. And which I thought about it, and I said, well, that is true, because where do they get all these statistics on crime in certain communities? And where do they get all the statistics that tells them how many officers they need in one community versus another community? And what time of day crime exists and doesn't exist in and all those kinds of things come from data. So they must be collecting something. They don't want us to know they're collecting data, but they're collecting data. And so I understand why they don't want to do it. I understand that they don't want the exposure, and I understand the concern. But that still doesn't lessen the fact that these things are necessary. So when I get the opposition from those who organize to protect their members, I take that as a part of their job. You know, he wouldn't be police chief of Long Beach if he didn't say that. Okay, so and I have no animosity toward him or any of my friends who are in the police department, because that's their job. And so once we kind of understand that in the community, we don't get excited over that, because that's their job. My job then is to not only help the police, but also to create fairness and justice for community. And that's the issue that's important for legislators. We shouldn't get confused and think that our job is only one-sided, and that is protecting the police. We have to protect them. We have to give them the resources they need to do their job and be supportive of them. But we also have to protect the community. We have to ensure justice and fairness and equality. So, you know, I understand that. And so I don't get excited when somebody has an agenda that is one way, and my agenda is much more comprehensive in essence. So I deal with the police all day long, and I deal with the issues they raise. And this has been quite a challenge for the last 10 months, dealing with these bills. But at the same time, I stay vigilant about the fact that I am not confused. My job is to represent the community, and they're part of the community, but they're only one part. They're not the whole part.
Now, in regards to law enforcement and your share of complaints and different things from them, what type of challenges did you face from them, law enforcement?
Well, you know, it was interesting, and I you know, I met with them several times on not only this bill, body camera bills and others, and you know, I tried as much as possible. We did. We narrowed our bills down so that it wouldn't be huge number of data points that they had to collect. We heard that. We heard a number of things, and so we made as much as possible in working with them to make the bill as doable and practical and yet as effective as possible. And I understand that. And so we did. We made a lot of adjustments to the bill, but I refused to destroy the bill, which is what people wanted, not to do it at all or to do it in such a weak way that it would have no meaning. So we made as many compromises as we could. And I understand that. It's always, that's what a bill is about. It's a give and take. But in the end, I had to have something to give to this community that was going to be significant, not something that would be so watered down or be unimportant. And up to the very last moment, people wanted to water down the bill before it went to the governor's desk and the Senate, and when it came back to our house. I refused to do that. Even members felt like, well, it might get vetoed. I said, well, if it gets vetoed, it'd be a good bill vetoed. I'd rather have a good bill vetoed than to have a weak bill passed and deceive people that we got something and we end up with nothing. And that happens too often. So we had a good relationship, and I still have a good working relationship with all the police officers in San Diego and all the different departments and that kind of stuff. But they understand that I had to basically make sure that this community is being protected, that this issue of racial profiling is an old issue. And I had to remind my members in the Assembly who only saw videos last year, you know, of what happened in Ferguson, that the issue of Ferguson has lived in my life ever since I've been in California and before. My father was in Arkansas. You see that kind of vigilante, even when the police officers, there was the sheriffs who didn't do anything. So as a result of that, this has only come to light because they can see it now on their own cell phones. But this is something that the African American community has lived with.
Give you two examples addressing what law enforcement calls pretext stop. But before I do this, please give me a moment to explain to our listeners what a pretext stop is. A pretextual traffic stop involves a police officer stopping a driver for a traffic violation, minor or otherwise, to allow the officer to then investigate a separate and unrelated suspected criminal offense. In a June 1996 decision, the United States Supreme Court addressed the validity of pretext stops under the Fourth Amendment. In Wren versus United States, the Supreme Court unanimously held that where people have probable cause, police have probable cause to stop traffic offenders, a pretextual motive cannot invalidate the stop. Having said that, in our community, most of the pretext stops either revolve around suspected gang members, especially in our community, whether they look like a gang member or they think they're a gang member. And even though being in a gang is not a crime, law enforcement believes that gang members are engaging in criminal activity. Now, I remember there was some homicides that have taken place in in the city of San Diego, and I was actually on my way to a curfew sweep because we had a program that was dealing with curfew sweeps. And two police officers got behind me, and I believe they were the gang suppressing unit. They followed me about 12 blocks. And then when I turned down the street to get to the location I was going to, they followed me. And they finally put the light on me. And what they said to me is that my license plate light was out. And that's why they stopped me. But they didn't give me a ticket. But then when I started telling them where I was going, where I was, who I knew, and so on, they kind of hurry up and, and finished what they were doing and left because I started dropping names. I'm going right down here where the captain is and so on. So they kind of, dropped. But I felt that was an unnecessary stop. And I didn't know too much about pretextual stops then, but when I talked to a police officer that came after I put in a complaint, he came and talked with me about it. He shared with me that was a pretextual stop. And one of the things that he said is that, once they get behind you, no matter how long they have to follow, eventually you're going to make a mistake. So the second example is actual stop that an officer shared with me. And he said gang members suspected of sometimes of getting committed crime, so they did a pretext stop on some gang members. And when they stopped them, they actually had their masks, their gloves, guns in the car, and so on. And so many times they justify, pretext stop because a lot of times sometimes they do, when they stop folks, they do, catch people in the midst of committing a crime or committing a crime. And I want to ask you, my question is, can a pretextual stop be used as a way to racially profiling young men in our community?
Well, it can, and it has been used so often. And it's unfortunate that most young men believe that they're going to be stopped, and unfortunate because when you begin to look at pretextual stops, the question is this pretextual stop done evenly across the board? In other words, if you're making these kinds of stops here on Imperial, are you making the same kind of stops in Claremont? Are you making the same kind of stops in La Jolla among young people who might be going out to do something illegal,
right,
or have come from doing something illegal?
Right.
Normally we don't. We don't make those pretextual stops in those areas,
That's
even
right,
though they commit the same amount of crimes, and the crimes sometimes are more violent crimes and may even involve more drug use. But we don't stop them. We don't stop them until the crime has been committed.
That's right.
And so that's one of the challenges that hopefully this data will show,
okay,
that you're doing a lot of stops, which we already see. They claim some data is already there, and we look at it and then they say it's not true. That you stop us more often, yet you arrest us fewer times. Generally, when you stop them, there's an arrest involved, mainly because you're stopping them because they've committed the crime already. So you you do us in advance and harass us. And unfortunately, what happens is that when you're stopped, you kind of know what's going on. And then you get angry about it at some point because I've had my own family member, my son stopped and sat on a curb and gas lamp. District hadn't done anything, and they go through his whole car, and he wasn't driving fast, he wasn't doing anything, just sitting on the curb while everybody drunk walking by him, throwing up, he said, and all this kind of stuff. And he feels like everybody's looking at him like, well, what did he do? Did he rob a store? So immediately you get angry because you're sitting here having done absolutely nothing, and all this stuff is happening. Now, it takes a superhuman being not to get mad at the police, not to say, why did you stop me? What is this all about? And just to say, thank you for stopping me. I mean, it takes a superhuman being. And that's why I say oftentimes these stops lead to attitudes, behaviors that shouldn't have happened in the first place. And you find innocent people then being thrown on the ground, being handcuffed because while they were, quote, resisting the police officers when they felt like they shouldn't have been stopped in the first place. And so that is a real challenge, I think, because it's hard to tell our young people over and over, when you get stopped, be cooperative, be this, be that. Most of the time, young people come home, they're so angry, they're in tears, they're crying because they've been stopped unfairly, they were treated so differently. And even one person said to my son, we might have to put you on the gang list. Now, my son had done absolutely nothing, never been in a gang, and yet a police officer's going to tell him they may have to put him on the gang list. And I had to basically deal with that, but for what? He said, why? I mean, why would you put me on a gang list? He hadn't done anything. He had gone to dinner with a friend in the gas lamp, and he and a friend were driving out of the gas lamp. That was it. Wow. And he was stopped. So these kinds of things, the question is, okay, if you're going to do those contextual stops, do you do it in every community?
Right.
Do you do it in every community? And and when you begin to look at the violence in communities, when you look at the break-ins and the robberies, there are more robberies and break-ins downtown and in those high rises and in La Jolla and PB than anywhere else.
Right.
Yet you're not doing the stops there, and those people's houses are being vandalized all the time. So it's a question of fairness in the process, and that's what we're looking at. Are you being fair? If you're going to do these, if you're going to use these methods, is it being fair?
Right.
When I deal with the attorney, the district attorney concerning 182.5, and she was talking about why they were getting all these people together and da-da-da. I said, do you do the same thing in other communities where the KKK exists?
That's right.
Or, that's a violent group. Is everybody who knows a KKK person, whose family member is a member of the KKK, do you have a list of those people? When something goes down in that community, we're burning a cross, do you arrest all those people and charge them with the same crime?
Right.
I mean, I'm saying if your job is to use something like this that's gang-related, KKK is a gang. So you need to then apply the same strategy over there that you apply here. If you don't, then obviously my community feels more violated than any other community because you're only focusing on that over here.
That's right. And yes, about fairness. So what is the difference between racial profiling and criminal profiling? I know police use a lot of time. They say we're not racially profiling, we're doing criminal profiling.
Well, if an element of criminal profiling is racial, then we have a problem. Okay. If criminal profiling has to do with, say, for instance, you're noticing, if you're looking at data, that a person has bought a brand new Mercedes and has no identifiable income, paid cash for it. The police, they profile you on that when you get ready to buy one because they want to know where the source of the money came from, blah, blah, blah. So those kinds of things are indicators of criminal activity or criminal things taking place. But the fact that you're African American, that should not be an element thrown in. And that's one of the problems. If you begin with saying, well, we know black men commit a lot of crimes, that's racial profiling.
Right.
But if you say we know folks who don't have this or this or this that goes across the board that hits all categories, then you can talk about criminal profiling. But if the racial element is thrown in, it's racial profiling and it's incorrect.
Very good. So if racial profiling is proven through AB 953 data collection, what would be next?
Well, obviously people are still talking about body cameras. And, I never believed body cameras were going to be the answer to the problem anyway. Everybody else did.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to talk about policy because, I figured, which is what's happening right now, is the body cameras would not necessarily provide any kind of relief for the community because now everybody's all freaked out about the fact that they don't have to use them, don't turn them on when they get ready.
Right.
There's no rule about that they also don't let anybody see the film.
Right.
You don't know what the rules are about viewing the film, when you can, when you cannot. So when they started with the body camera stuff, I said, I told my staff, this is only going to frustrate people.
Yes.
Because there's no policy about how to use these things. These become another tool, and sometimes in the illusion of justice and freedom and equality, where we need to have some clear guidelines to say if you're going to use them, here's what you got to do, and here's how you need to make the information available. Otherwise, as what is happening now, people are just frustrated because they want to see the film. They think people are hiding something from them and all this other kind of stuff. And so it has created more headache, look like, in terms of what you do with the film and how long they're supposed to keep it and all this kind of that there. So I understand there will be some body camera bills dealing with privacy issues, dealing with how long the film should be kept, and hopefully who should be viewing them. I know Assemblymember Quirk was working on a bill. I'm not sure that my staff is working to see what kind of content that bill will have in terms of whether we'll support it. We held up a bill by Senator Huff last year because it had no content in it. It said everybody write their own policy, which to me was no policy at all.
Exactly.
So members of the Assembly, we got together, the various caucuses, and we killed that bill. We held it up, we held it over. So I told my staff, look in it to see if Huff still has the appetite to do a body camera bill, because I told him it had to have some significance, it had to have some review by community, it had to have some transparency, and so as a result of him not giving any of that, I refused to support the bill. And I was fortunate that the members of the Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, the API Caucus, and the LGBT Caucus refused to support the bill and was killed and put on hold hold in the Assembly. So I'm optimistic that if he decides to go forward, that it'll be a bill with some substance.
All right, all right. So there's a report that came out about education.
Yes.
Right. Can you share with us about that report?
Yes, it's a report, and anyone wants to see a copy of it, it's in my office here in San Diego, and they can call our office at 531-7920. It's a report done by Ed Trust West. I understand it was presented yesterday at the Association of African American Educators seminar that they had here in San Diego. This report indicates that as we had anticipated consistently, African American children continue to be the lowest achieving children in the state of California, beyond all students, beyond the immigrants, beyond everyone else. And it calls Black Minds Matter, is what the report is called. Okay. Black Minds Matter. Right. And this bill, this report by Ed Trust West really opens up and reveals what we've already known, what we see consistently in the data, the fact that there's racism involved in the education of our children, that African American children are underachieving in every category, and even other reports that we've seen in terms of just kids graduating, kids being on task by third grade, whether they are going off to college or not. We've got the lowest percentage at the University of California of any of the ethnic groups. We're still at 3%. Wow. I mean, when I was at UCLA or when I left there, it was almost about 3%. We have not improved at all at the University of California. The CSUs also have limited numbers in terms of our admissions. We have a crisis in our community around education, and our community should be outraged. Yes, should be outraged what is happening in every one of our schools, just about, and we should be outraged. I mean, we're the people who authored free and public education in this country in the 1800s. You know, when I was doing research on Marcus Garvey in the early 1900s, black people were the most literate individuals in Baltimore, D.C., Chicago, New York. We had the highest literacy rate. We had the highest reading rate. You know, we built 100 and some odd black colleges in this country where no other ethnic group has ever done that. And for us to be in a position right now where people are taking advantage of our children, not educating them, parents should be outraged, should be basically at our schools demanding more from our school board. We just put an additional $8 billion into our schools at the state level. We should be demanding. We've got a local control funding formula. We should be demanding that there are some programs and efforts to improve the achievement of every African American child in San Diego County and throughout the state. And so we're going to be looking at that, because that is a situation. There was a hearing held Thursday at the Capitol on Black Minds Matter. Ed Trust West was there talking about it. We're going to try to see if we can get them to come to San Diego to have Ed Trust West here and talk about Black Minds Matter, because we have got to build a movement of accountability for the education of African American children. The reality is, when black kids achieve, everybody achieves. Right. That's the fact, because everyone benefits from it. Right. And we open the door for others, and then we find ourselves still outside the door trying to get in. So this is a crisis. It will have long-lasting effects upon our kids getting jobs, and as there's a greater demand for our education in terms of jobs and opportunities, talking about building our community, strengthening our community, all that is a part of it. And so we've got to really become very vigilant about the education of African American children in this community and in this state.
Now, so what kind of questions do you suggest that parents ask their children on a daily basis about their classes?
Well, I think, first of all, parents do the usual thing. We ask our kids, how was school? How did it go? All that kind of stuff. And that's fine. I mean, you want to have that kind of information that's there. But you need to ask your children how much homework they have. Okay. You know, my sister talked about the fact that her grandson never had homework. She couldn't figure that out. And he had... his homework was always done in class. Well, if he did homework in class, then the teacher teach. Where's the teacher time to teach? And so he comes home with no homework, no this, no that. Of course, he could not pass a high school exit exam. Wow. Good kid, athlete, one thing or another. Didn't have the basic skills to be able to do that. We've got to start demanding rigor in our kids. As a community, we got to start demanding that our schools have AP classes. We don't have south of 8 in the high schools right now in San Diego Unified School District. So they've taken all of our AP classes out. Our parents should be outraged that we don't have AP classes for our kids. So it goes on and on and on in terms of what is happening with our children and those kinds of things. There's also another report that just came out concerning our black girls and black girl matters, and how it's over, how it is basically we're over policing. That there's a new report on Black Girls Matter, pushed out, over policed, and underprotected. That's a new report. So there's a number of very significant reports that's coming out. I was just told by someone they want to know what AP is. AP is advanced placement classes. Those are classes that exist in our schools around certain subjects. And if you get an A in an AP class, instead of getting 4 points for an A, you get 5. And that's how we wonder how an A is at 4 points, and kids have GPAs of 4.3 and 4.5. You know, where did that come from? They had AP advanced placement classes. And what has happened is that there are no advanced placement classes at Lincoln, and there are no advanced placement classes at Morris. Wow. So all of our high schools south of this area, I'm not even sure if they have any at Hoover, but many of the poor communities across the state don't have AP classes. And they sued in Inglewood because there were no AP classes, because their kids were getting 4.0s, all A's, but could not get in UCLA because they didn't have AP classes, because they needed a 4.2, a 4.3. So what happens is that you're cut off at the gate if you don't have an AP class. It's a gatekeeper. You can't get into UCLA, UC Berkeley, because you didn't have AP classes. Wow. And most folks don't know that our schools have taken them all out of the poor neighborhoods. And there may be 15, 20 of them at La Jolla High School and Claremont and Point Loma. All of them have AP classes, but our schools don't have any.
Now, how do you measure academic progress then?
I measure, there are multiple ways of measuring academic progress. You know, our kids, first of all, every child should be able to pass a high school exit exam. Right. And the main reason why I say that is because the high school exit exam is an 8th and a 9th grade proficiency. Mm-hmm. So it is not a 12th grade proficiency. Okay. So it is not 9th, and that's why people wonder, how do people pass that high school exit exam and still have to take remedial classes when they get to college? Because it is not a high school proficiency. It's not 12th grade. Okay. It's 8th and 9th grade. Wow. And so I think the English part is 9th and the math part is 8th. But the bottom line is, it is so every child, if you've been in school for 13 years, by the time you get to 12th grade, you should be able to pass an 8th or 9th grade test. That's number one. So every child should pass a high school exit exam. That's number one. Every child should have the ability to choose what they want to do with their life, unencumbered by the fact that they don't have certain skills. In other words, if you want to be an engineer, you should be able to be an engineer because you have good math skills. Right. If you choose to go in the military, you should be able to pass a military exam. If you choose that you want to become a welder, right, you should be able to pass a basic test for welding. Right. Your high school experience should have basically prepared you to have good math and good writing skills, so that you are not saying, oh, gee, I would really love to be an electrician, but I can't pass the basic math test to become an electrician. That should not be, you should not be encumbered by that. Your limitation should be what you want to do, your desire, much more than your skill level. And so I've seen too many children who wanted to do things, who wanted to be doctors, who wanted to be engineers, who wanted to be lawyers, but could not do it and had the real passion for it because they didn't have the skills. You know, it's a crime that when we put kids through school for 13 years, have goals and aspirations that they want to achieve, and what their limitation is the fact that we have not taught them. You know, when I was in a small school in South Africa, Chris Hani School, I went to visit this little school. Beautiful little schools, and basically they were in 10 boxes. A bunch of kids all jammed together. And they had a philosophy that is so true for all schools. And it said, if our children did not learn, it is because we didn't teach them. Real simple. Not because they don't have two parents, not because they're poor, because all these kids were foster kids, were poor, their parents had been killed or died from AIDS or something. They were all very poor kids. They said, if our kids do not learn, it's because we didn't teach them. And that's direct accountability for the performance of children. And we have to have that attitude. If our kids don't know something, it's because we didn't tell them. Because they can learn it. Yeah, sure. You know, if they have average intelligence, they can learn it. So we have to take direct responsibility for the education of our kids.
All right, I want to ask you one more question in regards to education. What are the best school or district resources that we should consider using as a family to support our children in the classroom?
Well, you know, the best resource that we have is a highly prepared and qualified teacher.
All right.
I try not to put too much drama on parents, because I say that because my parents did not have the skills and the knowledge to create, to have a child end up at UCLA.
Right.
They didn't have that kind of skill. They had the desire. They didn't have the skill. They couldn't do my homework. But my teachers could have high level of demand for me, and my parents could make sure that I met those demands. And that's what our parents should be doing. Our parents should be supporting what's going on in the schools. Also looking for different opportunities and activities for kids to be engaged in. Every parent should make sure their child is in some organization that is positive. Whether it's a youth program at church, whether it's the Urban League program, whether it's our youth program in the 79th Assembly District. You should make sure your child is in some program that's going to encourage them to have good leadership skills and to do well in school. That's a part of it. That's what parents do. They're the support system. When there was the school in Los Angeles, when they had Anya Palmer had a school in Los Angeles, and his kids were out achieving everybody. And it was really funny. People asking, well, what do you ask your parents to do? How involved is your parents? He said, all I want my parents to do every day is when the kids come home with homework, make sure they have a place to sit to do the work. He said, because they were teaching trig at third, fourth grade. He said, most of our parents can't do trig. He said, so we're not asking our parents to be good at this. He said, but give them a place to do their homework. Yes. Make sure they get their dinner. Get them to bed on time so they can get a good rest. He said, get them up in the morning, and if you have the resources, get them breakfast and get them to school on time. He said, that's all we ask our parents to do. If you do that, he said, and they come in there with a good attitude, he said, we will do the rest. He said, because most of the times parents can do that. And when you think about it, that's what my parents did. My parents made sure I did my homework. They made sure I got to bed on time. They made sure I was up in time, had oatmeal in the morning or whatever, got to school, and didn't cause any confusion and that kind of stuff. My mother, they made sure I had those essentials. And I think for our parents, that's important. We have to tell our kids that there's nothing more important in the world they do than go to school and have high expectations for them. Don't let them slip and slide and peep and hide. Make sure they're getting A's and B's in all their classes. Don't accept C's and D's because that's what you got. A lot of times parents will say, well, I understand, Dr. Weber, I didn't do well in algebra myself. I said, well, then you believe ignorance is hereditary? They say, no. I said, well, then don't tell your child you didn't do well in that, because then your child won't do well in it. Have high expectations for them. Encourage them. If they need some assistance, make sure they get it. But also communicate with the school. Let the school know that I expect more of my child. I expect my child to perform. I expect those kinds of things. Because if you don't do that, I can tell you, they'll have a negative attitude. I remember going to school once with one of my kids. And got to the school because my daughter had said, so-and-so talking back to the teacher. And I said, oh, my goodness, that's not my kid. When I got to the school, they said, well, Dr. Weber, everybody does that. I said, wait a minute. My kid ain't everybody. This kid lives over here at my house. And so just because you expect negative behavior out of other people, don't expect it out of my child. And so I think sometimes we have to make sure our parents, teachers understand we're going to be supportive, that we want much for our children, but also the fact that we want much out of them in terms of their ability to educate our children and to look for additional ways to do that.
So with the few minutes that we have left, can you tell us about the 79th District Youth Advisory Council, and what is your view on community-oriented policing?
Well, one of the things that we have, we've formed an advisory council of young people, and I encourage anyone who like for their teenager, their person between the age of 15 and 21 or 2, to join this advisory council. They set their own agenda. My goal with this advisory council of young people, and they've done some great things already, is to allow them to learn what it is to be a member of the California State Assembly, to allow them to basically get involved in the political process. I plan to take them to Sacramento so they can see what it's all about. I want them to lobby for bills. I want them to author a bill themselves that they think is important in this community, and they're working on one now. And so we want to develop a leadership team. One of the things I discovered that, when I got to had to run for the assembly, I said, where are the young people? They should run for this. I need to rest. And I discovered that I need to build the capacity of this community, and it begins with kids in high school want to do it. So we have a good advisory committee. I strongly believe in community policing. It's very important that the community community participates and works with the police officers, that they become a part of our community. And we have some great officers in this community who show up at community council meetings, who are actively involved, and who are doing some great things to help our kids. And that's really where the confidence comes, when you have officers who know the community, who want to work to try to help our children be the kind of people they need to be, and want to protect the community. So when they show up, we know that it's going to be greater protection and less drama in terms of what's going to happen to them and their families. So we're excited about that. But I encourage anyone who wants to be a part of our Youth Advisory Committee to call our office at 531-7920 and to talk with Ms. Jackson, who is my staff who works with the Advisory Committee to do the kinds of things that's necessary. We also have a Senior Advisory Council, too, that meets at the George Stevens Center, and they're looking at legislation, because one of the things I discovered last year in legislative packages is there's very little that we do for seniors statewide. And so I've done a senior bill in terms of their civil rights. We tried to increase some of the resources available to them last year, but our seniors need a lot more support, a lot more effort, and I'm working with to figure out ways in which we can help those who are on SSI to have greater opportunities, whether it's transportation, housing, those kinds of things. You know, I always say we'll be judged in this world by what we do for our children and what we do for our seniors, those who are least able to handle the issues that they face in every day, that the humanity and of us as a civilized society will be how well do we care for our children, and how well do we care for our elders. Those are the two things that will be important, and I think as a state we have to focus on those issues and make a difference in those two categories.
So is there anything else you'd like to add there?
You know, I've been blessed to serve and to represent the 79th Assembly District. It's a great district. I tell people all the time it's the best district in the state of California because it has some of everybody in my district, and it challenges me to always try to find new and innovative ways of representing this district. This community has given me much, and I'm honored to serve them and to work with them. We've got great challenges ahead, and most of you know I'm a fighter. I'm a warrior. I'm not afraid of too many things in life. God has protected me in so many ways that, you know, there's not a whole lot other individuals can do to me. But we have some great challenges ahead. I plan to tackle this issue of education. I know I'll become most unpopular, just like I did with the police part. But I want to thank the community and the groups that came out to support, always who come out to support my legislation, who fight with us and accomplishing some very significant things, whether it's prosecutorial misconduct was one of our bills to stop the prosecutors from holding back information and all those kinds of things. So we're excited about the coming year. We're excited about working to improve our community. And I just thank you this morning for having me here.
Well, no, and thank you. We thank you, Assembly Member Shirley Weber, for being on our show today. And it was an honor and privilege to have you. And we thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. And next week, we want you to tune in for another great show on What's Happening Now on KBLKradio.com. God bless you, and hope to hear from you very soon.